You may recall a while back on the channel I took a nostalgic trip back to the past and explored the days when the Alien movies found their ways to VHS for home video viewing. Looking back, these were questionable presentations, as in order to get a widescreen film that was shown in theaters to fit into a square box for your television, different formatting needed to be achieved. This was pan and scan, a method that ended up cutting off nearly half the original image of a film, and in some cases required creating artificial camera movements, the scan, and sometimes even artificial camera cuts to accommodate for television's 4:3 aspect ratio. It was especially bad for the first film and Alien 3, both being shot in the 2.39:1 aspect ratio, though not quite as problematic for Aliens, shot in the less wide 1.81:1 ratio. At the time, this was just a common practice, and the Alien films were far from the only casualties of this kind of reformatting. But there was another workaround for home viewing presentation besides a stringent pan and scan from the original final aspect ratio. And while not as prominent, it was utilized in quite a few cases. With an eventual home video release or television broadcast in mind, many films were shot with an open matte filming technique. The real intended aspect ratio would be captured, but along with it some extra space at the top and bottom to be used for television presentations should they wish to do so. A great example of this can be found on the special features of the Terminator 2 DVD. Shot in Super 35, here we see the open matte print being worked with, alongside the final intended aspect ratio and the home viewing intended pan and scan ratio. The image has a much larger field altogether, and using that, the 4:3 cut is created. There is still image missing on either side, and in some cases the artificial panning is still needed to follow the action, but it is far less intrusive and distracting than if this had been done converting the 2.35:1 ratio to 4:3. This wasn't always the endgame for open matte filmed movies, but it was there, included in the prints of the film. So if you ever went to see a movie before the digital revolution and saw a boom mic or a stage light or something that shouldn't be there at the top of the screen, only to watch it at home on VHS or DVD sometime later and not see it, it's likely because the projectionist incorrectly framed an open matte print of a film. All this is to say that perhaps learning from the complete butcher job that was Alien 3's pan and scan version, the next film in the series, Alien Resurrection, employed the open matte technique of filming. Love it or hate it, Alien Resurrection has a distinct visual style. Love or hate the style. While the 4:3 full-screen version presented for home video is certainly a compromise, I'd argue that it's less egregious than what would have resulted if it were pan and scanned using a hard matte of 2.39:1. With the full-screen version, there's still a fraction taken off the sides, but to compensate for an even deeper zoom, we instead get some extra image on the top and bottom of the screen. You may end up seeing a little bit more of the set, a little more of an actor's body, but nothing that would really make you raise an eyebrow. The compositions of Jean-Pierre Genet's shots still come through despite the difference in aspect ratio and the extra image. Most importantly, you can look at the full-screen version and look at the widescreen version and come to the conclusion that undoubtedly the widescreen 2.39:1 aspect ratio is the intended vision. It is the true way we're supposed to see this film. Now, Paul W. S. Anderson's Alien vs. Predator film from 2004, also shot using open matte, filmed in 2.35:1, is another story. This is a very curious case, and in comparing the widescreen and full-screen presentations, there are times where it almost feels like each is a different film. Released 7 years after Alien Resurrection, the home video market had changed drastically. DVD was the big thing for home viewing. But widescreen televisions weren't catching up to the technology as quickly as they should have been. A lot of people kept their square TVs as long as they could, but still wanted all the enhanced video and audio and bells and whistles of movies on DVD. The studio's solution? Full-screen DVDs, of course. These made the rounds like nobody's business during that era. Chances are you may have accidentally bought a few full-screen DVDs yourself, or maybe not accidentally, no judgment. To Fox's credit, they actually did a pretty novel thing when Alien vs. Predator was first released on DVD. You could grab yourself 2 different versions with 2 different slipcovers. There was the Predator-centric slipcover for the widescreen version of the film, and there was the Alien-centric slipcover for the full-screen version. Were you Team Predator or Team Alien? The actual case underneath each would display both our beloved creatures evenly. But if you were a super hardcore fan, then maybe you just couldn't resist getting both, and maybe in hindsight, that wasn't too bad of an idea. So let's take a closer look at the differences between these presentations. Of course, there are the little things that you'll see only in the full-screen version, mostly innocuous. Things like you'll see a little bit of Charles Bishop Weyland's hand on a railing here. Any number of these kinds of details can be spotted throughout the duration of the film. And as we saw in the Terminator 2 example, image is still missing from the sides, even though we gain it at the top and the bottom. But this is over a decade since T2, and by this time they had the method down pretty securely. So here's a fun little detail you can spot between the versions. There are 2 instances where we see the point of view of a digital camera operated by the character Thomas. You can see that for each aspect ratio, a different graphic is generated to show the camera's display. Rectangle framing for the widescreen version, square for the full screen. Nothing is zoomed in on in the full screen version, the screen isn't squeezed thin to accommodate, and there's no quick change in aspect ratio either. Each were specifically designed for their respective presentations. And I do think it is important to stress that this full-screen version we're looking at here isn't some rare oddity or work print or anything like that. It was an officially released version. It was ready to view the exact same day of release as the widescreen version, and anybody who owned a DVD player could watch it, even if they did buy it by accident. So surely they had quality control people looking at it, and assessing it, and determining it was acceptable viewing for private exhibition. Not to mention any broadcast versions that may have went with the 4x3 option, and lest we forget the VHS release. In 2004, VHS tapes were still being released, and people were still holding on to that technology in its final days for new release movies. But the question is, does this 4x3 version clash with Paul W.S. Anderson's intended vision? I can't say exactly for sure, because at times it feels like the full-screen version communicates things better. There are some subtle things unseen in the widescreen version. Like here, Sebastian is nervously holding on to his lucky Pepsi cap. This nuance is out of frame in the widescreen version. I suppose that's okay because we see it in another shot later. Another little moment though, with Miller and Lex after Miller gets scared by a penguin. He's clutching onto Lex, which is kind of endearing, kind of a cute moment. But it can only really be seen in the full-screen version. A small detail, yes, but actors come up with these little things, and it's sometimes fun to see the full amount of body language they can bring to a character. And if that's not enough, then what about this? Sebastian and Miller are trying to convince Lex to stay and guide them on the mission. Miller jokingly threatens to show her more pictures of his kids. He actually pulls out his camera, which is pretty funny. The only thing is, you cannot see this when it's in widescreen. It's not in the frame. So, was this an intended part of the moment or not? Is it so trivial a detail that it didn't matter, one way or another? I know Paul Anderson isn't Sam Peckinpah or anything, but you have to draw the line somewhere. There has to be some kind of intention in what's being communicated on the screen at any given moment, right? Let's take a look at another moment. Lex and Miller are on the helicopter. The magazine featuring Weyland on the cover is resting on Lex's lap. It falls off, and Miller picks it up for her, but you can barely see it in the frame in the widescreen version. There's a scene with Verheiden trapped in the maze, and he discovers a discarded weapon covered in alien slime. We, as the audience, actually see it a little bit earlier in the full-screen version. So, are we meant to see it first and have a little bit of knowledge that the character isn't privy to for the sake of suspense, or are we meant to discover it at the exact same time as the character does when the camera pans down? These are different degrees of engagement. Slightly different, but still different. There's also a quick moment where Scar wakes up after being face-hugged, and we see a little bit of the facehugger on the ground along with the alien he killed earlier. Both can only be seen in full frame. As we know in the world of Alien, a dead facehugger means its purpose has been fulfilled and its host has been impregnated. I know it's supposed to be a little surprise at the end, but how much exactly are we meant to be visually keyed into at this point? These may seem like such small things, but they really do end up making a difference when we're engaged with a movie and following the visuals. Different visuals do indeed offer a different type of engagement as a different type of response to any given scene in the movie. Now obviously there are certain things in mind when a director frames a shot, and it's not as if you're supposed to see every single thing in full. There's an artistic license, a reasoning in displaying what the audience is meant to see. You don't have to see the entire framing of an actor's shoulders to the top of their head in a shot. You don't have to see their full-body view in a wide shot. That's fine, but there are some things I would argue for in the full-screen version that we do see. This is all just my opinion, but I feel like maybe we should see the full scope of the Queen perched atop her ovipositor here. I feel that in this scene, Scar's blade should be seen in full here. Maybe we should see the entire dead facehugger beside the character Rousseau when she's waking up instead of just the top half. And maybe we should be getting a fuller view as she's clutching her chest before the alien bursts its way out. Similarly, maybe we should be able to see the full expression of the sacrificed Chosen One in the flashback instead of just her eyes. And there's a pretty nice shot here amidst the chaos when aliens, predators, and humans first collide. It's a quick shot, but nicely composed. The Celtic predator is grabbing Sebastian in the background as Lex comes into focus in the foreground. I think the shot looks much better when we can see more of her face and the entirety of the scene in the background. Another nice shot is where Lex and Sebastian discover they're being stalked by an alien as they try to make their way out of the pyramid. The alien tail smoothly glides around the frame as drool drips from above. I like how we get a full view of the full tail in the 4:3 ratio instead of just partially as we get in the 2.35:1. Even something as seemingly trivial as this shot here where Lex fires off the flare gun. We see the flare go up into full view of the station. The lit flare can be seen in full view when we look at the 4:3 version, and I think it just looks a little better. But getting more at the top and bottom isn't always advantageous. One persistent problem I'd say with the full-screen version would be the close-up shots. They feel further away than what they should be, taking focus away from the actors' expressions. Some close-ups don't even appear as close-ups that way. But then, there are moments when seeing a little bit more does work a little bit better. Take, for example, this scene where Lex is struggling to mercy kill a cocooned and impregnated Sebastian as Scar looks on. It has been said of the 4:3 ratio, also known as Academy ratio, that there is no better way to frame a face. I think that's true in this instance, whether the face belongs to Lex or of the masked predator. There's a lot of it that comes down to a sense of visual engagement that you can't quite pick apart and compare. It just feels different. The majority of this movie takes place in this massive labyrinth pyramid, and in 4:3 you get a deeper perspective, while in 2.35:1, of course, you get a wider one. There's no real way to say which works better, but I can definitely say there's a different feeling to each. Maybe it really does just amount to questioning whether you want to see a little bit more on the top and bottom or on the sides, but in a way, I think that visually, the 4:3 version has a style to it that's more in tune with its comic book roots. It's technically not a comic book adaptation, but very clearly it draws inspiration from the original Alien vs. Predator comics. It's not really a comic book movie, but it kinda is. So the full frame actually ends up lending to that nicely, and I guess the whole time that crazy bastard Zack Snyder was actually onto something. To be honest, I initially thought that presenting his Justice League cut in 4:3 was pure pretension on his part, but I do kind of get it now. I'm not going to outright declare that the full-screen version of AVP is the superior version, but I would strongly recommend giving it a viewing in full if you have the chance. There's lots more to take in, scene by scene, than what I can show you here. Likely at this point you've also noticed that the color grading is different between these versions. The video source for the widescreen footage you see here is from the Blu-ray, originally released in 2007, though the 2004 widescreen DVD has the same color grading as the full-screen DVD. The change in grading, though, can be traced back as far as the 2005 Special Edition DVD. And this is the color grading that can be seen on digital copies of the film and the streaming version found on Disney Plus Star. When it comes to the aspect ratio, I can only really speculate on what Paul W.S. Anderson was intending visually, though I would imagine that he stands by the 2.35:1. I suppose that is what he ultimately intended for the film, and it was how he wanted audiences to see it. As for the new color grading, well, I'm not sure if he had any say in that. Unfortunately, it's not too unusual for studios to do this for home video releases, unbeknownst to the film's creators. The result is something I guess they felt looked spiffier for the new and exciting high-def era, and the result is now something we're stuck with as currently the most widely available version of the movie. The color is less vibrant, it's colder, and more of a metallic blue. It's like a little bit of life has been sucked out of it, unfortunately. I don't know who made this decision, but this is what we're stuck with now. When it comes to films being altered, especially now in the streaming era, there's an ongoing call for the importance of physical media. I love being able to stream movies, I love having a digital collection, but I also wouldn't trade my physical collection for anything. I don't plan on letting go of my full-screen copy of AVP on DVD anytime soon. The movie was made nearly 20 years ago at this point, and there were two separate ratios in mind for audiences at home. But think of how far we've come in the time since then. 16:9 televisions are now the standard. We are not limited to what can be displayed in this square. Now, more than ever, I think it may be time to revisit Alien vs. Predator's home theater presentation. I think the ideal aspect ratio may not be 4:3 and may not be 2.35 to 1, but actually 1.85 to 1. This is the aspect ratio that fits most fully with a 16:9 television screen. We could get the full picture, everything missing at the top and bottom, and everything missing on the sides too. Once more, I can't speak to Anderson's ratio intentions, but I do know this. As we can see, in the behind-the-scenes breakdowns of the movie, all of the visual effects were produced to accommodate a 1.85 to 1 aspect ratio. So we at least know that if it were presented this way, nothing would stand out as incomplete or not properly rendered from a VFX standpoint. This is true of 4:3, which I'm sure is what was being kept in mind at the time for the square TVs at the time, but the time is now and the TVs are wide and 16:9. You can actually even look at some of the trailers for AVP, and indeed, we see a presentation that is 1.85:1. Further to that, there was an HBO First Look special that aired in 2004, which shows a fair amount of clips in that ratio. So, we can look at all that footage. We can see these select moments and compare how they look between the theatrical 2.35:1 ratio, the 4:3 home video full screen ratio, and the elusive 1.85:1 ratio, which would be ideal for 16:9 TV screens. And wouldn't you know it, the other aspect ratio source has a different color grading from the other two. I wouldn't normally necessarily read too much into it, since it's not all that unusual that trailers and promotional clips are commonly released earlier and possibly before the color grading process. But at the same time, I think it looks pretty good this way. I do kind of wonder how the rest of the movie would look based on these clips. To answer this video's question, no, I don't necessarily think that the full-screen version of Alien vs. Predator is the better version. It's certainly different. But looking at the possibility of a 16:9 version makes me think that would be the best version. Everything missing from the top and bottom that we get in the full screen, and everything we get missing from the sides on the widescreen. It's the best of both worlds. Why not make this version available? These streaming services love to tweak with movies, oftentimes censoring them with no announcement of the action whatsoever, which recently happened with Disney Plus star in a stream of The French Connection. And I'm sure many of you may remember what they did with Splash, too, and who knows what else. So why not use this incredible, far-reaching home video technology and let us have more options? Disney also loves to tout their option to view movies in a special IMAX enhanced mode. So why not try that out with some older movies and have it available under that kind of guise? And why should we be stuck with a color grading, seemingly utilized arbitrarily 18 years ago, that does not represent the original theatrical presentation? The least they could do is cook something up for the 20th anniversary of the film, which is very quickly approaching. There definitely are fans of the film. It has its own unique following. I know that much. So get us something special and in 4K, and even, as crazy as it sounds, released on a physical disc. We can dream, can't we? But for now, hold on to those physical copies. Don't throw away your full-screen DVD of Alien vs. Predator anytime soon, because you actually may have something quite unique. And maybe it's something worth going back to from time to time. That said, you can feel free to trash your copy of the Predator Ultimate Hunter Edition Blu-ray. You can burn that, send it to hell. But maybe that's a story for another day. As always, I'd like to thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to leave it a like, and be sure to subscribe to the channel to keep up with future videos. A very special thanks goes out to Brandon James, Grizz4756, Jackson Roche, Jason A. Faney, Justin Pierce, XenoZip, and XenoShadowMorph, Queen Tiers of the Patreon Hive. Thank you to Gregory Ford and John Griggs, the Hive's Praetorians. A very special thanks goes out to Lady Anne in the Ellen Ripley Tier of Excellence. And in the role of WEYLAND YUTANI executives, Emuric, Nanashi FX, Nicholas Butta, and Wesley A. Weaver Jr. If you'd like to join the Hive and support the channel, check out my Patreon page in the links below. In the meantime, you can catch up with Alien Theory over social media. Follow at alien_theory on Twitter and at alientheoryyt on Facebook and Instagram for more. And until next time, this is Alien Theory, signing off.